Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to In the Spread. I'm Nick Kefalides, and we're out here fishing fall time down in Florida. And today we're going to cover a variety of different things, but mainly we're going to focus on a specific method, and that's going to be fishing offshore structure. Offshore structure can be categorized as anything from brush piles in deeper water to any kind of deviation in the bottom where you've got ledges, drop-offs, you've got humps, anything that the fish can relate to, like contour lines, big lay-down trees. So today we're going to be using our grass. We'll be kind of driving over this deeper water, fishing anywhere from 20 to 40 feet of water, and we're going to be targeting these fish that are holding, that are relating to this offshore structure. We're going to try different techniques from crankbaits to spinnerbaits to jigs, things that are going to, get down to the bottom and try to entice these fish to strike. This time of year, we just had a cold front roll through last night. The wind's going to kick up, so they're not the most ideal conditions for catching fish, but we're going to try to put that theory to the test, put our skills to the test, and see if we can't come out with something really good. So stay tuned. We got something really good coming for you guys. So today we're fishing a body of water that's referred to as it can be referred to as a mine pit, as a phosphate pit. It's called different things, but you'll find a lot of them in the state of Florida. These man-made lakes that were dug out for purposes of construction, or when they were building highways and roadways and whatnot. Some of them obviously are older than others, and this particular mine pit was dug out back in the 60s, so it's been here for quite a while. The fish in here have had time to mature, and the ecosystem's flourishing and whatnot. So this is what we'll be fishing today. This is very much not like your traditional lakes in Florida. A lot of times in Florida, you're fishing bodies of water that are extremely shallow. You're fishing on average from anywhere from 2 to 5 feet of water, or even less, depending on the time of year, if the fish are spawning or what they're doing. So, this is like a, for any Floridian or somebody that's used to fishing down in Florida, you get an opportunity where you can fish some deeper lakes or some offshore structure and actually use your depth finders and your graphs. It's pretty advantageous. So that's what we'll be doing here today. Just to give you an idea, this lake can get as deep as 60 feet in some spots, which in Florida, that's, unless it's a man-made pit like we're fishing, that's just unheard of. I think there's maybe like 2 or 3 lakes in the state that are natural, that are even anything remotely close to that. So it's a little bit different style of fishing, but it can be lights out once you figure them out. I mean, there's so much water, in this body of water. The fish can be anywhere, at any given time. It just depends on the time of year, the conditions, the moon. We're fishing with some full moon conditions. It's about 10 minutes till 8, and moon's still high in the sky. So we're trying to figure out if these fish have been feeding all night, and just kind of what they're relating to in terms of structure. So just some of the different features in this lake. It's got a little bit of everything. You've got some shallower areas that have some grass coming off the bottom, such as hydrilla and a little bit of eelgrass. You've got, as you can see off here to our right, you've got some reeds and whatnot along the bank line. But for the most part, I'd say the most distinct features in this lake are the offshore structure. What we're fishing right here is a ledge or drop off, and basically right here in front of me, from about my 12 o'clock all the way to this area here, is a shallow flat area. And it ranges anywhere from, 3 feet on the bank down to about 12 feet in the middle, and then there's a sandbar over there. But off to my left here is a very distinct drop off where it goes from about 10 feet of water all the way down to 40. And so a lot of times, you'll come over this area with your graph and you'll see that fish are holding right on this drop off right here. And sometimes they'll hang, right at the top as it starts to drop off, depending on, the water temperature and what they're doing, if they're active and they're feeding. And then sometimes when they get a little more lethargic and they're not as active, you'll see them, as that ledge is coming down, they'll usually hang out right in the middle of that ledge. And sometimes you'll see pods of bait that'll be on it, so they might just be hanging out near that bait. Or, they're in a state where, the thermocline is set in and the fish are just hanging out in the middle of the water column above that thermocline where the oxygen levels are, ideal, and, just trying to survive. Ultimately, that's kind of what these fish do. They move around from time to time where they're going to find themselves to be the most comfortable, where the oxygen levels are good, where the bait is predominant, is good, where the water temperature is comfortable. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to be, fishing some of this offshore structure, some of these ledges, some of these drop offs, some of these humps. Yeah, so we're going to be out here fishing some of these offshore structures, some of these humps, some of these ledges and drop offs. There's a couple areas where there's some lay down trees. So we're going to kind of bounce around today, hitting that stuff, trying to find the fish, trying to see what they're doing, what they're relating to in terms of cover. And, we're going to use a variety of different baits to try and pinpoint those fish. Right now I'm using a hard jerk bait, something that imitates an injured bait fish. And, just kind of right off the edge of this ledge here, right where they're typically hanging, a little bit of grass on the top edge of it. And right now we're just trying to rip this bait through it. Typically these fish will hang literally right on the edge, and the grass is growing where it's coming out basically right to the edge, and then it stops. And those fish will congregate right on the edge of that ledge there. And so we're basically just trying to pinpoint them. I'm fishing a hard jerkbait right now, right over the top of the edge of that ledge. And this is basically just imitating, an injured bait fish. And I'm putting it right in their face, trying to give them an easy meal, something that's kind of suspended. It's not on top, it's not on the bottom. And a lot of times, as soon as you can see I'm doing the twitch, twitch, twitch. A lot of times when you pause it, when you stop, is when they'll grab that bait. But we're going to try a variety of different baits here and, see if they're wanting a moving bait or a swimming bait, or if they're looking for a slower presentation, such as a jig or a shaky head or something on some of these offshore, rock piles and brush piles and stuff that are out here. So that's kind of what the game plan is here. Last night we had a cold front kind of move in, and the winds, started to pick up a little bit. And, historically speaking, anytime you're fishing in front conditions, regardless of where you're at, you can be in, the south part of the country, you can be up north. Anytime you have a distinct drop in the temperature, a pretty significant drop, such as we had last night. I want to say it was like a 10-degree drop in a matter of 6 hours. A lot of times the fish will just shut down, especially these fish down here in Florida. They don't like change. They don't handle it very well when temperature drops, because year round it stays pretty warm here. So it can make for a really tight buck. tough bite. But it makes it, you know, this is where you put your skills to the test. It makes it, you know, interesting because you're not out here doing the same thing. You know, you can't bank on, oh, well, every time I go to this hole or this lake, you know, they always bite this. They always bite this. Well, okay, this is going to force me as an angler to be like, okay, well, I can't get them to bite what they're normally biting. So, you know, I need to figure something out, and it's going to force me to kind of broaden my horizons and try different things, try new things, and really think and try to figure out what these fish are wanting, what they're doing. So I'm gonna switch, try the jerk bait. We're gonna switch to a rattle trap here. I've got a 1/2 ounce rattle trap. This is just a red eye shad made by Strike King Lure Company. It basically fits into the lipless crankbait category, if you will. There's a bunch of different companies that actually make lipless crankbaits, and this happens to be one of my favorite. This is a 1/2 ounce. They make them anywhere from 1/4 to 1 ounce, depending on how deep you need to get that bait out. So we'll try this. It's got a lot of flash. It makes a lot of noise. There's rattles in it. So we'll just see if just changing up the profile of the bait will do anything. A lot of times, you know, when you have these types of conditions, you know, you got a front just moved in, you know, wind's blowing a little bit, you know, full moon situation, moon's still kind of high. In most cases, it'll be a later bite. You know, we're out here, it's only 8 o'clock in the morning. We just started fishing, and you know, sometimes, you know, that bite won't really turn on till, you know, 10:30 once that water temperature gets up a little bit. That's when you'll notice those fish start to become a little more active. So that may or may not be the case here. We haven't really had a whole lot just yet. You can feel some more of that grass. And off to our right here, you know, is this is, you can't really see, once the sun gets a little higher, you'll be able to see the you know, the change in the color of the water, and that's because there's a sandbar up here. It comes up to about 1.5 feet of water, and about 20 yards off the boat here is where it starts to drop. And you know, the fish just relate to that particular ledge really well in most cases, and they sit in that grass and kind of use it as cover and camouflage to ambush that bait. You know, if you've got fish that are following, a lot of times these fish will just follow it all the way to the boat. Like, you'll get the lure to the bait, or get your lure to the boat, and you'll go to pull it out of the water to make your next cast, and you'll notice there's a fish following it. And I've had that happen where multiple casts, you see them following it, and you're like, okay, they're obviously following the bait, but they need something just a little more, you know, to get them to hit that bait. So in cases like that, instead of just doing a steady retrieve, a little bit of grass here, up on the top of this ledge, what I'll do is I'll give it a quick twitch, or I'll just stop it and then start retrieving. Just something different, something, you know, that will make that bait dart out a little bit erratically, you know, that could trigger that fish into biting that bait. You know, he might be following it, and then all of a sudden you stop it and he's gonna run right into it. Chances are, if he touches that bait, he's probably gonna eat it. So I'll do that if I notice I got a lot of followers, per se. Anytime you're fishing a rattle trap over any kind of grass like we've got on the top part of this ledge here, you'll feel it come through the grass a lot of times, and more so than not, when you hit that grass, as you're pulling it through and kind of ripping it free from that grass, is when that strike will come. trying a couple things on the top side of that ledge, and I don't know if they're just, you know, not awake yet or they're not really active yet, but I want to try kind of coming off the ledge a little bit, get down into a little deeper water. I'm gonna throw a Carolina rig here, and as you can see here, I've got an ounce weight here. It's a Gambler Lures rattle weight, and so I basically got this thing down to a little glass bead with a clacker, which I'm not sure if you guys can hear that, but basically just creates a little bit of commotion, a little bit of noise. And to that, I've got a small swivel, and I've got about a 2-foot leader of 17-pound monofilament line. And the purpose for the monofilament is obviously, you know, you don't want them to be able to see that line, so it you know, it's clearer than braid, and it's harder for the fish to see. And so I'll do that. You know, a lot of guys will use, you know, fluorocarbon leaders as opposed to mono. I like the mono simply because mono floats better than fluoro. And when you've got a situation like we've got here where the fish don't seem to be congregated on the bottom, they're kind of like in the middle of the water column, I like the mono because it floats better than fluorocarbon. And not to say that it will just float on top of the water, but it's a little more buoyant. So if you think about it, you know, if I've got this 1 ounce weight that's sitting on the bottom, it's going to allow for, you know, this mono being a little bit more buoyant to keep this bait, you know, kind of up in this area. So you've got your weight that's dragging the bottom, you're dragging that weight along, you're feeling for structure, any kind of rocks, trees, anything like that, and this bait's just kind of sitting here, you know, in the suspended area that the fish may be. And I'm just throwing a small Zoom trick worm with a 2/0 hook on it. So we're gonna throw this out off this ledge. You know, it's a slower presentation than the other 2 baits that I just covered. And right now we're just trying to dial it in. We're trying to allow the fish to talk to us and let us know what they're wanting, what kind of presentation. You know, in my experience of fishing in these conditions anywhere in the country, really, you know, when you've had a front come in, the fish tend to kind of get that lock jaw, and they end up wanting a slower, more of a finesse presentation, if you will. So initially started out, you know, with jerk bait, rattle trap, trying to cover some water. Those are good baits if you're trying to cover a lot of water and target these fish. But sometimes when they get, you know, shut down from a front like this, you know, sometimes they just want a subtle, small bait that's just really slow moving. The way I'm going to work this bait with this Carolina rig is, you notice I'm not raising my rod tip or swim it or anything like that. All I'm doing is got my rod out to the side, and I'm just kind of sweeping to the side. I'm just kind of pulling, because what I want to do is I'm feeling the structure down there. That's a 1 ounce weight that I've got on there. So it's on the bottom. And all I'm doing is basically just dragging a little bit, feeling the bottom, dragging a little bit, feeling the bottom. Now right now we're coming off the side of this ledge, so I want to make sure I'm not dragging too fast. I want to maintain contact with the bottom as I'm dragging this thing along. Just keep the bait moving. I'm just pulling. I'm using my rod to actually retrieve this bait. So I'm not reeling while I'm moving the bait. Once I pull a little bit, drag that bait across the bottom, or that weight across the bottom, I should say. Then I'll reel up my slack and I'll drag a little more. And if you're fishing a steep drop off like we are, sometimes, you know, as you're pulling off that ledge, the bait will want to drop further and further. Go ahead and give it that slack it needs, you know, to stay on the bottom. So see, I'll drag a little bit, and then once I let it go, you can just kind of feel some of the rocks. Like there's it's mainly like I'd say like it's very similar to a shell bed off the side of this ledge. You know, it's mainly like sand and a little bit of gravel and whatnot. So I'm not feeling a whole lot once I get off the side of this ledge. You can kind of feel some of the rocks and the gravel and whatnot, but that's okay. You don't really need, as long as you're maintaining contact with the bottom, you know, you'll feel those bigger rocks and stuff that you come over. And if you're dragging, you know, to the side like I am, and all of a sudden you feel like you're kind of getting hung up on something, you know, go ahead. At that point you can go ahead and raise your rod tip and pull that bait, trying to get it to come over, trying to get that to come over whatever you might be hung up on. When you're fishing any kind of offshore structure, or any structure really, you want to try to hit it from every angle that you possibly can. I've noticed, I can't tell you how many times, you know, I've fished an offshore, you know, brush pile, or, you know, some lay down trees where I've sat the same spot and I've casted like 20 times. I've graphed over with my depth finder. I know without a shadow of a doubt that there's fish there. And I cast, and I'm like, man, I cannot get a bite to save my life. Well, I've had it happen on more times than I can count, where I will change my position. I'll maneuver my boat, position myself to where I'm pulling that bait from a different angle, and I'll actually get the strikes. They'll get them to bite. Just as something as simple as just, you know, dragging that bait, you know, through a different side of that brush pile, or, you know, whatever it might be. So don't give up if you've, yeah, there's that ledge there. Don't give up if you've, you know, you feel like, oh, I've casted 25 times to this spot. Try hitting it from different angles. You know, you can try 10 casts from 4 different angles, and you'd be surprised just from changing something so simple on the results you might have. We had a situation like that recently where, you know, we marked some fish on some offshore structure, and I must have casted probably 15 times. There's that brush pile there. Now, sometimes when you run into trees or something like that, when you're Carolina rigging, because you're dragging a heavy weight across the bottom, you know, sometimes it's just inevitable. You know, you're sweeping, you feel you're caught in a tree, and you know, you try to raise your rod tip to get it to come over, and you just get hung up. And you know, it sucks when that happens, but it's just kind of, it comes with the territory and the style of fishing that you're doing. So in that case, my best recommendation is don't pull. You know, chances are that heavy weight's wedged down in between some rocks or on a tree or something like that. It's probably not going to come off. It's going to break before it comes off if you try, you know, hauling back and jerking on it. So what I'll usually do is I'll drive the boat. I'll take my trolling motor and just kind of slowly motor over to it, and I'll position myself directly above the piece of structure that I'm hung on, as you see here. And what I'll do is I'll just get myself to where I'm just past it. A lot of times if you just go a little further past that piece of structure that you're hung up on, and you just kind of pull a little bit in the opposite direction, it'll free itself. So we're going to try to get our rig back here and save yourself some money. And that's all that took. You know, we got our rig back. We don't have to retie everything. You know, the Carolina rig takes a little longer than, you know, your traditional, you know, worms and whatnot. So what we're gonna do now, we hit this ledge basically from deep water, casting into shallow water and dragging this Carolina rig down the ledge. So we're gonna approach it from a different angle now, and we're gonna bring it up the ledge. I'm casting from the top side of this ledge in shallower water, and I'm casting in deep water, and I'm basically dragging this thing up the ledge. So we'll see if, you know, changing the angle like we talked about will provide something different in terms of the results here. These fish are very inactive this morning. I have no doubt it has to do with the mixture of the full moon and the cold front that came in last night. So we moved to a different area. We're fishing this point over here, and there's a pretty steep drop off, about 20 feet off the bank, and there's a lot of rocks and stuff. You can kind of see out here there's piles of concrete, and you know you can kind of see them up on the bank, but there's a lot more of it, you know, under the water, right on the top of where that drop off is. And you'll find a lot of this in these old phosphate pits in Florida. And so what we're doing is just kind of fishing off that ledge, seeing if there's any fish holding on those rocks and trying to target them hanging off that ledge. Right now I'm throwing a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait, and I'm just kind of slow rolling it. Over top of that, there's a hump that comes out here. It drops off, and then out by kind of where the boat is almost, there's a hump that comes up. So I'm just slow rolling this spinnerbait kind of over top of that ledge to where it meets that hump where it comes up. So this is a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait made by a company called War Eagle, and it's just a heavier spinnerbait. It's really nothing fancy. You've got a Colorado blade and a willow blade. I like this particular combo when I'm fishing out here, and you know, white with a little bit of purple, kind of imitating a shad. And I like using these heavier spinnerbaits when I'm fishing any kind of offshore structure, just because it gets down quicker, and you're fishing it a little deeper in the water column. So what I like to do is first I'll try slow rolling it along the middle of the water column. I'll let it kind of sink down a little bit. And I'll just kind of slow roll it over top of, you know, rock piles, ledges, whatever it is that I'm fishing. I'll try that. And if that doesn't work, I actually found a lot of success doing a lot of guys will refer to it as swimming a spinnerbait, but I call it yo-yoing. So I'll basically let that bait sink to the bottom, and as it's sinking, those blades are just kind of fluttering, and they're giving off a lot of flash and whatnot. Look like a, you know, injured bait fish. And what I'll do is once it gets down, I'll pull it up and I'll just kind of yo-yo it. I'll let it sink back down, and I'll pull it back up. Let it sink back down, pull it back up. And this has worked for me fishing offshore structure when you need that. Fish are holding a little bit tighter to whatever cover you're fishing over top of, and they're not willing to, if they're not very active and they're not willing to come up into the middle of the water column and grab that bait, then I'll try yo-yoing this thing and get it, right over that cover, right through the cover, the rocks and the brush and whatnot, and kind of put it right in their face. But a lot of times they'll hit it as it's falling, as it's fluttering, they'll grab it. When you go to pick up is when you'll feel them. Being that we've got rocks and stuff here on this little ledge off this point, I'm going to go ahead and throw a little Spro Fat John DD20, and this is it's a 16 to 20 foot diver, depending on what diameter line you're using, and I want this thing to get down and make contact with the bottom. You might have to go to the next size up, an even deeper diver. I'm just trying to hit this little hump right here because I know that there's typically fish that hang out on top of, now obviously we can't see it because it's underwater, but that hump that I'm telling you about, fish usually like to hang out on the top of it and use it as kind of an ambush point, or where they feed. So what I'm trying to do is swim this crankbait right over top of it and trigger one of those fish into eating this thing. Right now we're just doing a steady retrieval. I'm just trying to get a gauge of what the bottom is feeling like out here. Try to find exactly where this hump is. There's actually two of them out here. And I've caught some good fish off of it before doing the same method. And anytime you're fishing a deeper diving crankbait, or any crankbait really for that matter, you want to make really long casts. That's the whole reason behind these deeper diving crankbaits. These guys are using 8-foot rods. I've got an 8-foot rod here. You want something that you can really launch that bait out, because it's going to take some time for that crankbait to get down into the desired depth. So you really want to try to rocket this thing out there to give it time to get down to the depth that you're wanting to target these fish at, and ultimately stay in the strike zone for as long as possible. Now occasionally you can pause it, you can stop that bait and then continue to retrieve, or you can stop it and give it a little twitch, try to make it look like it's injured, or try to give something to cause the fish to trigger them to eat that bait. We're throwing that crankbait, and there's a little bit of it's a hump that's got some grass on it just off this point. And I was throwing that deep diving crankbait, trying to pinpoint exactly where it was. It comes up to about 10 feet of water, so I didn't want to idle over it and try to look at it, because sometimes when you do that, you'll spook those fish. So, I was throwing that deep diving crankbait, hoping I would trigger a bite, but I just don't think they're looking for a moving bait at this time right now. So now that I know exactly where that hump is, I'm going to throw this shaky head here. It's a 3/4 ounce, 3/4 ounce shaky head with just a Magnum trick worm made by Zoom. So I'm going to toss this thing out there and try to work it over top of that head of grass, that little hump, and maybe this slower, more finesse style presentation will be the ticket in terms of what they're wanting, because it doesn't seem that they're very active right now. It's still kind of early. So we're just kind of, you know, like I said, we're letting these fish talk to us and letting us know what it is that they're wanting. I've got a bunch of rods out on the deck right now just because, you know, haven't fished here in a while. It's been probably at least 4 months, and not really knowing what these fish are going to do, especially given the conditions and the hand we were dealt. So we know that there's fish in this area. We're kind of marking them now. We didn't drive specifically over the area that I'm fishing, but we know that there's fish all around here. They seem to be suspended, and they're not on bait, so it doesn't look like they're feeding. But sometimes you get them hanging out, you present, you know, something slower like this. We're just trolling along this ledge here and just trying to locate the fish. They seem to be very stubborn this morning, but you know, we're finding schools of them, and in some of those schools, they seem to be grouped very tight together. And a lot of times when you see them really tight groups like that, that's when they're not really active. They're not really moving around. They're not really chasing bait. So that could be what we're dealing with here. But we're just going to move up along this ledge right here, and I know there's some more offshore rock piles and whatnot right up here. So we're just going to kind of troll our way up there. We're going to be looking at our graph and our down scan right now, and once we come across something, we're going to try to pinpoint those rock piles, drop something down to them. This is going to be a slow retrieval, so you're just be patient with me. This is going to be, I just really want to dissect this area. So we went over, there's some big rock piles that are kind of off the bank here. You've got, what it is a hump that comes up, and it's not a real prominent hump. It's not something that goes from like 35 feet to like 15, but it goes from about 35 feet to about 20 feet. And on top of that, you know, 20-foot area, there's some rocks and whatnot on top of it. And we just marked a bunch of fish sitting there on top of it. So I'm gonna, right now I've got a shaky head, and I'm just kind of dragging it over top of that, the top of that ledge where those rocks are. And hopefully these fish will eat. You know, I think today is going to be a later bite. We're coming up on close to 9:30, and usually about 10 o'clock at this time of the year, and this lake is feeding time. You know, being it's a deeper lake, being that we've got the full moon, you know, these fish have probably been eating all night. So we're going to try something that you don't really get the chance to do in Florida a whole lot, and that's a true finesse style fishing. I've got really light tackle here, 7-foot medium spinning rod with a Fluger spinning reel, and we're throwing it's a little 1/2 ounce shaky head. And basically what we're going to do is, you know, it's only 8-pound test braid, and I've got about a 15-foot leader of 10-pound test fluorocarbon. Super, super light application. You know, when these fish get really picky like this, sometimes you got to go down to this ultralight gear, ultralight line, and just, you know, hop this shaky head around on the bottom. And try to get them to bite. We know they're down there. They're not really eating, but sometimes if you're fishing this really slow, just kind of bouncing it off the bottom, dragging it across the bottom. So this fish hit it about 5 feet from the boat and absolutely inhaled it. I was getting ready to pull the bait out of the water and make another cast. Let me get us off of that spot because I think it's holding more fish. But I mean, she just inhaled this thing. Trying to perform a little bit of surgery here without injuring the fish too bad. There we go. She's bleeding real bad. Yeah, she's bleeding all over the boat. So yeah, we got basically got a situation here where we've located some underwater offshore structure, some big laydowns. Look like some of these big cypress trees we got at some point with all the hurricanes we've had down here, you know, may have fallen into the water. So there's some huge laydown trees out here. And I was trying to fish a slower presentation with a jig, try to shaky head down there, and I just couldn't get anything to commit. So I figured I'd throw that big crankbait over top of it, just over top of those big laydown trees and those brush piles. And she must have followed it all the way back to the boat. So well, let's see if that was just a fluke or if there's some more fish over there like that. So right now I'm basically throwing this big deep diving crankbait over top of all these laydown trees. I'm trying to hit it from all different angles. And I know there's fish down there. We marked them on our depth finder. So it's just a matter of time before they eat. They haven't ate all morning, that's for sure. It's getting a little bit later in the day. Water temperatures come up just a little bit, so I'm hoping they start to feed here. But what you've got is these big laydown trees, and they've got branches and stuff as they're, you know, on their side that are kind of coming up off the bottom, and the fish are just kind of hanging out in that stuff. So I'm just trying to kind of rip this crankbait right over the top of it and trigger one of these fish into eating this bait. This is a bigger bait, so tend to catch larger fish. I mean, you'll catch smaller fish on this bait too, but this is what we refer to as a you know, big fish bait. Right now I'm just kind of working just a steady retrieve, about medium pace. You can see the bait there. And this thing will dive down to, it'll dive down to 20 feet. Okay, it looks like we got a little bit of a wind shift. So this morning, there was a little bit of a breeze coming out of the northwest, and it's actually shifted. We've got a breeze that seems to be coming out of the northeast now. So we're kind of trying to figure out, the proper way to position the boat and work it with the wind. That can always be a challenge in itself if you get into, heavy gusts or higher winds. So, but just trying to position myself to where I can really pick apart this underwater structure and hit it from all different angles like we've been talking about constantly. A lot of times these fish might even hit this bait, not necessarily because they're hungry. You might bounce it off of a tree limb or something like that, and if they're sitting there, it's just more of a reaction thing. It bounces off at it and they just eat it. I don't know though, that fish, I don't think that last fish we got was a reaction bite. I mean, she followed it all the way to the boat and hailed it about 5 feet from the boat. So that seemed like maybe that fish was tracking that bait for a little while because she was hungry. So I really hope we can get some other ones eating like that too. Whatnot off here in the in the background that we're kind of casting towards, but that's not really what we're intending to fish. Basically, you got those lay down trees, but there's also a pretty significant drop off to where there's almost a ledge right off of where those trees are. So you got those trees up on the top part, and then it kind of drops down. So in terms of offshore structure, I mean, this is ideal. This is what fish use to hide out, and that's kind of their home. They'll live there and just feed on bait as it comes to them. We're gonna hit it and try this one last cast, and then we're gonna switch sides and try to hit this from a different angle. We know these fish are here. They're stacked up on these trees, and it's just a matter of time before they eat. It's about every 3 to 4 hours these fish will eat. Sometimes a little longer in between, sometimes a little shorter in between. It really just depends on the conditions. But at the end of the day, they've got to eat. So it's really just a matter of time. We're going to try something real quick. I've felt using this 20-foot crankbait, I've been able to feel a couple tree limbs, but I want to try a crankbait that dives a little deeper, and I just want to see if, just by getting a little deeper in the water column, if we can trigger those fish to eat. Sometimes just going a little bit, further down in that water column, is all it takes. So we're gonna really try to pick this apart. This way I can eliminate it and say, okay, that wasn't it. I mean, this is how you catch like a trophy fish. Well, this fishing offshore structure like this, where those big ones just hang out, these aren't like seasonal fish that just come here. They just hang out here, man, and just feed because they're comfortable, you know. These fish are just, you know, this is their home, and it doesn't require a lot of work, you know. They're basically bedded down in all these trees and whatnot, and the bait's just surrounded, and you know, when it's time to eat or when they get hungry, you know, they don't have to travel far for a quick snack. So, you know, marking them down here, you could see, you know, all kinds of different fish, but there's some significant marks, some really big fish down here, and I've caught them off of these piles of trees before, so I know they're down there. But yeah, this is, when you're fishing offshore structure like this, big baits, you know, this time of year, you can catch some giants doing it. It's just a matter of catching them when they're feeding. So I want to try a different technique than the crankbait. We've hit it pretty hard from multiple different angles. So this technique is not, I mean, it's not like your traditional, we're going to throw a heavy spinnerbait. And, you know, typically when you think of throwing a spinnerbait, you're casting at the shore, you know, and you're bringing it through grass coming off the bottom, or you've got stumps or something like that. But in this situation, you know, with these fish being as stubborn as they are right now, I want to throw this big spinnerbait down there, and I basically want to jig it or yo-yo it. So I'm going to let it kind of drop down, and I'm just going to yo-yo it. Now, if you're balling on a budget or you don't have a ton of money to be spending on, you know, baits and lures, I wouldn't recommend, you know, trying this method or this technique first, simply because when you've got, you know, big brush piles and big lay down trees like we've got here, and you can't really see what you're fishing, the chances of getting hung up on something are pretty good. So, you know, you really got to be careful in terms of determining, okay, that's a bite, that's a stick, that's a tree limb, that's a brush pile, because you'll lose every lure you have doing this. But it can be productive, especially, you know, you've got the flash of these blades, and as that bait's falling, being a heavier spinnerbait, you've got those blades are just kind of fluttering, you know, mimicking, you know, a school of small bait fish or even an injured bait fish. So that's kind of what the intent is here. And we've got about a 15-mile-an-hour wind now. It's blowing pretty good, and we're casting directly into it. So it's just kind of natural to, it's normal to get a couple backlashes here or there, but that's all right. It gives your bait time to get to the bottom. And just yo-yoing it. Occasionally I'll feel tree limb. Right now, the biggest thing I noticed when we're looking at these fish on our depth finder is they're stacked up, but they're so bunched up. I mean, they're very close together, which tells me that they're not really feeding right now. They're not really active. Usually when you see them bunched up like that, they're just kind of hanging out. We've hit this spot pretty hard. We've only caught one fish off of it. Now, it was a good fish, but there's not enough evidence to convince me that these fish are feeding right now. So we're gonna move on. We're gonna fish another area, and we'll try coming back to this area shortly and just see if anything changed. We're working an area here where we're a little bit closer to the shore, but what we've got is some what we call riprap. Basically rocks, concrete, some boulders and stuff that are not too far off the shoreline here, and basically just throwing a lipless crankbait and just kind of ripping it over top of this riprap and these rocks and these big pieces of concrete, and you know, just trying to cover some more water here. You know, any kind of rocks that you find off the bank, you know, that can be considered offshore structure, and things that the fish will hold to or will relate to. So that's what we're doing now. Just moving along here, just covering some water, just watching our graph, seeing if we mark any fish. It's a little bit shallower than the areas we've been fishing so far this morning. Seems like we were marking good fish. There we go. It's an Oscar. He came off. Good, I didn't want to grab him. That's not the type we're looking for. But anytime you've got fish like that hanging out, and there's theoretically going to be, you know, bass with them. So what I was saying is, you know, we're not quite as deep as we were earlier today, and you know, we found the fish offshore. You know, we found them on structure, but I'm telling you, just the conditions, I think with this full moon situation and the cold front that moved in last night, you know, it's just tough. All these fish on this offshore structure in this deeper water, you know, 30 to 40 feet of water, they're holding really tight together. They're bunched up when you see them on the down scan. And I mean, I've thrown everything in the kitchen sink at them. And sometimes that's just the way it goes. You know, sometimes they won't cooperate or they won't bite, you know, but like we talked about, you know, it's just a matter of time. They've got to eat regardless of what kind of conditions, you know, in terms of a front or, you know, a storm or, you know, really like the full moon we've got going on, they're going to eat at some point. Now, being that it's been bluebird skies like we've had basically for the past, you know, week with the full moon, a lot of times when you've got no cloud cover to cover up that full moon at night, they'll feed it in the middle of the night and they'll pretty much just gorge themselves to where they're not even hungry, and then they'll just go into like hibernation mode during the day. And I believe that that's kind of what we're facing here today, and it just makes makes conditions really tough. It makes it hard to catch fish, but you know, they're here, and that's kind of what makes it fun. You know, that's what makes it challenging, is trying to sort it out, trying to figure out, you know, what these fish are doing and how you're going to get them to bite. That's what it all comes down to, because you know, there's so many different variables that play into, you know, catching these fish. You're not always going to have the same scenario, the right conditions. You know, you might fish the same body of water every time you go fishing, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be in the same spot you normally catch them, or that they're going to be eating the same thing, or that they're going to be, you know, as active as they were. You know, fish change, fish move, and they do what they need to do to survive. And this is just kind of a survival type thing that the fish do, you know. So we ran into an area where it's, you know, kind of transitioned from that riprap and rocks kind of coming off the shoreline here to where we've got some underwater grass and some hydrilla. So I kind of stopped where we were, and I've got a Texas rig worm that I just wanted to throw out and just kind of drag through this grass and just see what they're doing. I want to see if maybe they're relating to grass more than they are, you know, that rocky bottom, or even, you know, the trees. A lot of times in the colder months, you know, any lakes or bodies of water that have hydrilla, that hydrilla tends to tends to heat up quicker than the rest of the lake, so sometimes the fish will use it. There we go. Sometimes that hydrilla will warm up quicker than any other structure in the lake. And so a lot of times when, in the cooler months, you know, from your fall time into winter, you know, pretty little fish. Fall time into winter, those fish will move up into that hydrilla. One, because it's, you know, natural vegetation, it's going to provide more oxygen for them, but it's warmer water. And in the wintertime, especially down in Florida, those fish do not like cold water. So that was kind of my thought process behind, okay, we're seeing a little bit different cover here than what we've been fishing all morning. Let's fish it and just see. You know, we're just looking for something. We're trying to put some kind of pattern together.
Just for context, it's 16 feet right here.
Yeah, I mean, technically we're still, in essence, kind of offshore. You know, this is being the body of water that we're fishing here. You know, being an old phosphate pit or a mine pit, you know, it's deep. It's deep water. I mean, 16 feet of water, you know, in most lakes in Florida is kind of unheard of. So, you know, maybe these fish, for whatever reason, are going to be a little bit more active in that grass that's coming off the bottom in some of these areas. That was, I think, my second or third cast into this grass, and you know, it could be coincidence, could not be. We're gonna keep fishing it and just see, you know, try to put some kind of pattern together here and see if there's a trend with fish being in this type of cover. There's a little cove that comes back in here where it's still fairly deep, but I know that there's some grass that, you know, can grow off the bottom here. So we'll give it a shot and see if we can't get something fired up here. Another little one. All right, so we're developing a pattern here. We're still fishing offshore structure, but it's grass. We found tons of fish this morning on offshore ledges, brush piles, trees, rocks. I mean, they were just all over that stuff, but they weren't active. So there's one of two things that's happening now. Either it's the time of day, they're starting to feed. Missed that one. It's either the time of day where they're starting to feed, or they're just more active in this grass. It's about 15 feet right out in front of me where I just casted. Had bites on back-to-back casts, and what we've got is just this offshore hydrilla. And a lot of times, the last few bites I've had, these fish are hitting this bait on the fall, and it's very subtle. It's not a, you know, a big bite or something. You really want to have a rod that's, you know, sensitive to detect those bites. We're gonna work this area really good because even right below the boat, I'm marking fish, you know, kind of in that grass, just hanging out. But a lot of times, if you get, like what just happened with me, if you get a bite and you set the hook and you miss the fish, in a lot of cases, if that fish doesn't feel the hook, let's say, you know, you don't get that hook in them, it's not a big deal. You know, obviously you want to catch them the first time, but in a lot of cases, if they're eating, you can cast, you know, you can bring that bait in, fix your bait, reset, and you can cast right back to it, and that fish will still eat it if he hasn't been spooked. Now, if you hook them and they come off, a lot of times that's a different story. If they feel that hook, in most cases they're gone. That fish felt so much bigger. All right, we need your big sister. Go tell her we're here and we're looking for her. So I think we've kind of figured out how to get some of these fish to bite. We haven't really caught any big ones doing it, but we just started doing it about 10 minutes ago. Just throwing this Texas rig worm, fishing it through Offshore Hydrilla. You know, a lot of people will ask me, hey, if you could fish one type of cover and feel the most confident that you could catch fish, what would it be? And, you know, everybody's going to give you a different answer based on their experience and, you know, what their confidence level lies in, you know, where they've caught the fish. But mine personally would be Hydrilla. I've caught more bass out of Hydrilla than any other piece of cover. And it's just funny to me today, you know, how we went out, it came out here and, you know, we were targeting this deep, deep water with these huge laydown trees and these big rock piles and ledges and stuff, which they can all be so, so good. And you can catch great fish and lots of numbers of fish. And it's just funny to me how, you know, we tried a number of different things, and the only pattern we've been able to really put together today is fishing this, you know, offshore Hydrilla. So, you know, kind of just rambling, but the point that I would want you to take home, you know, for those of you guys who are watching is, you know, regardless of where you're at, what state, what region of the country you're in, you know, I've personally found Hydrilla to be one of the best pieces of cover, you know, you can fish for these bass. So any opportunity you have, if you fish a body of water and there's Hydrilla in it and you haven't hit it before, I highly recommend, you know, hitting it. You know, if it's shallow water, you know, go throw some top water frogs or buzzbaits or something, you know, over top of it. Or, you know, if it's offshore like this, you can rip rattle traps or crankbaits or, you know, drag a worm through it. But I'm telling you, I've just had so much success fishing Hydrilla, you know, all over the country. I think they just relate to it so well. You know, anywhere you see an abundance of Hydrilla, you know, it just, anywhere you see it, the ecosystem seems to flourish. You know, the bait, you know, you've got crawfish, you've got bluegill, you've got shad, you've got shiners, you've got sunfish. I mean, it's just, it all really, it's healthy, it lives, it provides a great oxygen for the fish. And that's mainly why I feel they hang out in it, because they can live in it and be comfortable, even in shallow water. I'm gonna pull up here in a second. I'm gonna show you guys, if you're not familiar with what Hydrilla grass is, you know, I'll show you, I'll get some up and I'll show you exactly what it is so you can, you know, kind of look for it when you're out fishing. and give you a better idea of, you know, what it is that you're looking for. See here, you know, some of this scattered hydrilla. I mean, look how close we are to the bank, and this is like 6 feet of water easily. So it might look like we're close to the bank, but we're really not. Let's see if I can break some of this off for you and show you kind of. Get us out of this mess here and show you guys what I'm talking about. So this is Hydrilla. It's kind of, you know, it's nothing to it, but you know, it's typically green, and if it's healthy, you know, when you pull on it like that, it should just kind of pop. See how it pops like that? It's kind of like, it's almost crisp, if that makes any sense. But it's real, this is real healthy stuff, and it actually filters the water, so it helps a lot of times with the clarity of the water. Anytime you have Hydrilla, typically you'll have good clarity water. I mean, just like we're looking here, you can look down at this water without polarized glasses, and you can see, you know, what we're dealing with here. You can see the weeds and whatnot underneath, and so that's what Hydrilla looks like. And you'll see it some areas where it's sparse like that. Typically it'll die out a little bit in the fall and the winter time. It'll start to get a little bit more sparse, but in the summer it can grow up to 1 inch per day. So there'll be areas where you see it almost topped out on the surface, and it can just be really, really good. Oh, there we go, one right on the bank. She hit that right on the bank. Let me go ahead and change my worm out here. That one was up shallow. I think she was small, but nonetheless, I mean, she was in a foot of water. And this is just your traditional Texas style rig. I'm fishing on a 4/0 EWG style hook made by Gamakatsu with a 3/16 bullet head, tungsten bullet head, and a little bobber stop to keep it from sliding up, as you can see. And pretty simple to rig this thing. Just insert your hook point into the head of the worm, go through about 1/4 inch, push it back out, slide this all the way up over the eye of the hook, like so. And then normally I'll put my index finger here on the top, and I'll try to give it a little bend and push that hook point through, and just turn it so that that worm lays nice and flat, looks natural. You don't want any bends or anything like that in it. You want it to look, you know, if your bait looks all boogered up, chances are fish aren't going to eat it. There he is. I think that was that little one that was. So I called it. That fish was small. Sometimes you can detect based off of the bite, you know, how big that fish is, and sometimes you can't. I've had some of the most subtle hits, you know, be some of my biggest fish. A lot of times you'll get these little ones when you're fishing a worm like this. You'll feel that peck, 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 peck. You know, they're just sitting there tugging at it. So, and that's what that one did. You really want that thump. If you can feel that thump, and then see your line, your line gets real heavy, or, you know, just starts to kind of, you see it swimming away. In most cases, that's a bigger fish. This wind's really pushing us around, so we're having to work on keeping the boat positioned just right. Can definitely make it challenging. It's a whole another entity you have to add into the equation. We're kind of suspended on what looked like bait. So I just wanted to give this a shot while we're over in this area. So I'm using a what's referred to as a hard jerk bait, plastic jerk bait. And reason I'm throwing this, we've got about 15 feet of water out here with a little bit of sparse grass. A lot of it's died off, so it's not quite as prominent as it was a few months ago. But this is a suspended jerk bait, and it basically imitates a wounded bait fish. And I fish this a lot of times when the fish are suspended, or I see them in the middle of the water column and they're on bait, feeding on bait. It's just a small little plug. This one particularly dives anywhere from 8 to 10 feet. You get them to dive anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, and in between that. And this is just, you know, the one I prefer for this particular body of water. And the way I'm working this bait is basically, pull this out here, we get a little bit of wind that we're working against. All right, so the way I'll work this bait is initially I want to get it down to my desired depth. So when that bait hits the water, I'll crank it like a crankbait. I'll get it down to the desired depth, and then I'll just twitch, 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 twitch. I'll pause it. And you just change your cadence. You know, you don't have to do, you know, 3 twitches and then stop. You can just change it. You want to make it erratic. You want to make it to where it's, you know, not predictable. You're just trying to imitate a injured bait fish that's just coming through the water. And a lot of times when these fish are in schools that are feeding on this bait like this, they'll grab this thing. You kind of see, you know, as I twitch it, I'll bring it up a little bit to the surface. But you can see when I twitch it, it's kind of, you know, darting back and forth. And that's kind of what you want. You don't want it to swim straight. You want it to look as if it's, you know, injured. When I fish this, I'm using a shorter rod, about a 6'9" to 7 foot medium action rod. And the reason I use a shorter rod is, as you can see, I've got my rod tip pointed down at the water. Now, if I had anything more than a 7 foot, you know, I'm about 6 foot tall. If I had anything longer than a 7 foot rod, what would happen here is it would affect the way I work this bait. I've got it, the rod tip down at the water, and if it was longer, I'd basically be slapping the water with it every time I tried to twitch this bait. So for that reason, you want a lighter action rod and something in the 7 foot range that allows you to work this bait as I'm doing. Now, if you're a little bit taller, if you're 6'6", you can probably get away with a 7'4" rod and do it without hitting the water. But because I'm, you know, average height at 6 foot, you know, this is just what works best for me. So it kind of comes down to, you know, one of those things we were talking about is using the right gear for the right application. You know, you don't want to be out here with a flipping stick trying to throw this twitch bait or this jerk bait. Too many rods on the deck. All right, so we've circled back around. It's been about an hour or so since we hit these trees. This is the area that we were at that we were marking a ton of fish. They were all bunched up together and they weren't really feeding when we came over here last time. So being that we know the fish are here, wanted to come back by again and just give them a slower presentation. I basically just got a, you know, a Texas rig worm on a pretty lightweight. I think it's a 3/8 ounce or something like that, 3/16. And I'm just gonna swim this thing over these big lay down trees and just try to trigger some kind of bite. I mean, they've got to eat at some point. I don't know if that point is going to be while we're out here, but we do know that the one bait we've had success catching them on today was this worm. So we're going to give it a shot. Oh, she fucking dropped it. I missed her. That's a good sign. All right, so we had a bite. We didn't execute the way we wanted to on the bite, but we did have a bite off the trees, and that's kind of what we've been trying to catch them on all day. I shouldn't say all day, but for the last couple hours, because we know that they're there. So hopefully that's a sign that maybe they're eating now. Or maybe they're just messing with us. Either way, we're gonna give it hell. Definitely had a wind shift though. Went from blowing out of the northwest to the northeast. Got about a 15-mile-an-hour wind now. It's always fun when you got to fight the wind. That was a fish. I know it was a fish. I know without a shadow of a doubt that was a fish. And what happened was I missed her. Fucking son of a bitch. I missed her. I felt her that I missed her, and it was down in the middle of a brush pile. And that fish, when I didn't catch that fish on that hook set, I pulled it up right into a bush. That's all right. We're gonna break that off. We're not ruining that spot because there's fish down there right now and they're eating. You know, I notice when I'm dragging this worm through these big lay down trees and these brush piles, they're kind of in one particular area. And what I've noticed is the majority of my bites are coming just as I start to feel some of those trees. Yeah, as I'm coming over a tree limb, or I can start to feel the brush I'm coming through. And that's what happened on that last one. It was literally dropping, was falling through one of those brush piles, and that fish ate it. Now I don't know if it was a small one or just didn't have the hook, but that seems to be the consensus here, is trying to make contact with these brush piles. And once I do, drag it over a tree limb or something, just kind of let it sit there for a second. There we go. That's a better fish. That's a better fish, my friends. You keep her down from jumping. Let this fish get the best of me now. And that's what we're after, okay? Offshore structure can produce big bass. You've got to have the patience and the right technique, but when given those two things and you execute, it pays off big time. So, I mean, this is a prime example. Persistence, persistence, persistence. I mean, Seth can tell you, we've probably sat over these trees for 2.5 hours total today, throwing everything we have to try to catch. We knew the fish are down there, and we knew that it was just a matter of time before they would eat or find the right bait. So it's a good little fish right there. Right about 4 pounds. So we're gonna keep working this area. We're gonna keep dragging that Texas rig worm over through these trees and these brush piles, and we're gonna see if we can't get her big sister. So this braid digs in. Just think, if you're fishing with any kind of braid, which, you know, if I have my preference, I'd be fishing with fluorocarbon right now. But because of what we're fishing, you know, with these trees, I mean, these huge brush piles and rocks, a mixture of everything that we've got down here, you know, I'm kind of forced to fish with braid. Otherwise, you know, I'd get broken off every time I, you know, catch a fish, and they try to get me back down in the trees. But, you know, something you want to take into consideration is if you got a decent sized fish that you set the hook on, before you go to cast out again, you want to kind of pull all that line out, because what happens is you set the hook on a big fish, or you got a big fish that's pulling drag and you've got braid on. What will happen is that braid will kind of dig itself down into the spool, and next time you go to cast, you'll get it about halfway to your target, and it'll do pretty much what just happened to me. So just something to consider. You know, there's pros and cons to just about everything, and that happens to be one of the cons of using braid. With that though, I wouldn't be able to fish monofilament or fluorocarbon with those trees that are down there. So we just caught that fish, dragging this worm through these trees and brush piles. Let's see if by catching that fish, it got some of the other ones fired up. Guys, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join me. I hope that the information and some of the techniques that I provided you help you guys in your quest for catching fish an offshore structure like we discussed today. So thanks a lot, and good luck in your future endeavors and your fishing.